All right, let's dive into the life of one of the most influential people in all of history. But this isn't just any old biography. Nope, we're going straight to the source, looking at the story of Muhammad exactly as it's told in Islam's own foundational texts.
I mean, think about it. How does one man's life, from way back, over 1,400 years ago, in the middle of the Arabian desert, end up shaping a global faith of almost 2 billion people today? That's really the big question we're tackling here.
And to even begin to answer that, you have to go right to the source texts themselves, the Qur'an, and the most trusted collections of traditions. Our whole goal here is to simply lay out the story just as it's told in those texts.
Okay, so to really get this story, we've got to rewind. We have to start before he was even born, in what's known as pre-Islamic Arabia. According to Islamic tradition, this was a world just waiting for something big to happen. It was primed for a massive change.
Yeah, this whole era is called the Jahiliyyah, which basically translates to the age of ignorance. Now, Mecca was a big deal, a bustling center for trade, but its spiritual heart, the Kaaba, was packed with something like 360 different idols, and this really reflected the society at the time. It was all broken up by pagan beliefs and just constant, endless tribal warfare.
But here's where it gets really interesting. According to those same source texts, his arrival wasn't supposed to be some random, out-of-the-blue event. No, it was seen as the fulfillment of prophecies that were centuries old.
Take the Quran, for example. It actually mentions a prophecy it attributes to Jesus, talking about an envoy whose name would be Ahmed. And Ahmed means something like the most worthy of praise. So this framed his arrival not as something new, but as the next chapter in a really long line of prophets.
So that's the world he's born into. But who was the man himself? Let's get to the moment that changed everything. The moment that turned Muhammad from a respected merchant into a messenger of God.
Well, his early life was tough. It was really defined by loss and having to grow up fast. He was born around 571 CE, and by the time he was just 6, he was an orphan. But despite that, he made a name for himself, became a successful caravan trader, and married Khadija, who is this incredibly respected businesswoman. Everything seemed set, until he turned 40. That's when his life took a massive, dramatic turn.
I mean, just look at this contrast. It's night and day. Before his mission, everyone knew him as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He was respected. But as soon as he started preaching his message, all that respect just evaporated. Suddenly, he's being called a sorcerer, he's being ridiculed, persecuted, all for sharing the very message he believed was from God.
And that whole transformation started right here, in a cave called Hira, just outside Mecca. The tradition breaks it down into 3 steps, really. First, he would retreat to this cave to meditate. Then, one day, he's visited by the angel Gabriel. And finally, he receives the very first divine message, the first verses of what would become the Qur'an. And that message was all about the absolute oneness of God.
So that first revelation, it kicks off this incredible mission. But at the same time, it lights a fire of fierce opposition. The next 13 years for him in Mecca, they were basically a fight for survival.
For the first few years, the message kind of spread under the radar, quietly. But then, around 613 CE, he goes public. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some new religious idea. This was a direct threat to the entire power structure and, frankly, the economy of Mecca, which made a ton of money from people making pilgrimages to all those idols. So yeah, the pushback was immediate, and it was intense.
And his first followers, who were often the poorest and most vulnerable people in society, they got the worst of it. We're talking constant ridicule, economic boycotts, even physical violence. It got so bad, so dangerous, that a whole group of them actually had to flee Arabia altogether, and they ended up seeking refuge in Christian Abyssinia.
And then came 619 CE, a year so bad it's known as the Year of Affliction. In just a short period of time, he lost his wife Khadija, who was his absolute rock, his emotional support, and his uncle, Abu Talib, who was basically his political protection. With both of them gone, he was just completely vulnerable. But here's the crazy thing. This moment of total vulnerability, it somehow, paradoxically, leads to the birth of a new community, and eventually a new nation. And it all happens with the emigration to a city called Medina.
This event is so important, it has its own name, the Hijra. In 622 CE, literally facing plots to kill him, Muhammad and his followers leave Mecca for the city of Yathrib, which gets renamed Medina. And this wasn't just moving house.
This was a massive deal. It was the foundation of the very first Islamic community state, and it's so pivotal that it marks year 1 of the Islamic calendar.
But just because they had a new city didn't mean they were safe. Not at all. A whole series of battles would decide if they were even going to survive. And as you can see, the tradition tells a very clear story through these battles. First, at Badr, you have this miraculous victory against impossible odds. Then at Uhud, there's a painful defeat, seen as a tough lesson in obedience. And then comes the ultimate test of their faith, the Battle of the Trench.
Just try to picture this for a second. A huge coalition of tribes, something like 10,000 men, all marching on Medina with one goal: to completely wipe out this new community. And the Muslims? They could only gather about 3,000 defenders. The odds were just staggering.
So what did they do? They dug a massive defensive trench, a totally new idea for warfare in Arabia at the time. And they managed to hold out for a brutal month-long siege. But according to the source texts, the stalemate wasn't broken by military strategy. It was broken, they say, by God, who sent a crazy storm in these invisible forces that just completely shattered the enemy's morale and forced them to retreat. That victory was a game-changer. It solidified the Muslim state in Medina and really set the stage for the final phase of Muhammad's life, the triumph of his mission and the delivery of his last most important teachings.
Hey, remember this number, 360? That's how many idols were packed into the Kaaba when we started this story. Well, a few years after that crazy battle of the trench, Muhammad marches on Mecca. But he's not coming for revenge. He's coming on a pilgrimage. And his return to Mecca was almost completely bloodless. In fact, he offered a general amnesty to the very people who had spent years trying to destroy him. Then he walked into the Kaaba and he personally smashed every single one of those idols. It was like a physical manifestation of his entire life's message: worship one God and one God alone. In his final year, during his last pilgrimage, he gave what's known as the farewell sermon. And the key takeaways were crystal clear, really foundational stuff: that all human life and property are sacred, that wives should be treated with kindness, and, this is a big one, the declaration that the religion of Islam was now complete.
But maybe the most powerful final message he left was actually a warning. In his last days, he told his followers, "Do not turn my tomb into a place of prayer," insisting that he was only a servant of Allah and his messenger. It's such a striking final statement, right? It emphasizes humility, not divinity. It's a final reminder that, according to the sources, the entire revolution he started was never meant to point to him, but only to God.